The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, released in 1991-1992 for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, is the third game in the storied franchise and one of the more well-regarded games on the console. It goes back to the overhead style of the first Zelda game, but with the additional superpower of 16 bits and better hardware, improves on it by a significant margin. And for as far back as I can remember, this was my go-to Zelda game. And may very well still be that to this day, because while the NES games were fine, one feels its age and the other follows its own beat. With A Link to the Past, you're getting the best aspects of both games finely tuned with a bit more polish, then expanded upon to deliver what I feel is a benchmark of 2D Zelda games. Allegedly taking place 100 years before the NES games, not that it really matters. I say allegedly because the back of the box calls this a sequel to The Legend of Zelda and the Adventure of Link, even though it says right on the top of the copy that you play as the predecessors of Link, which implies an ancestor, which makes this take place before, and... Who wrote this copy? The irate gamer or something? Jesus Christ. A Link to the Past has you assuming the roles of yet another fellow named Link, or whatever else name you prefer. This one a young boy who is summoned to the castle to break another Princess Zelda out of jail that will no doubt open up a much larger adventure involving magical pendants, alternate dimensions, and fly catching. A Link to the Past returns to the overhead action-adventure trappings of the original Legend of Zelda game, but also made it much better. There's actual scrolling, though the overworld is divided up into segments that you'll slide into as you travel. Link can move in 8 directions and is a much more versatile fighter, as he can swing a sword rather than just stab things with it. He also has a much wider selection of tools to aid him on his quest, which is good because he also has a larger menagerie of foes that are more than willing to pound him to the pavement. A Link to the Past is also much more narrative-driven, which kinda hampers the open-ended nature of the game, at least at first. The first chunk of the game has you storming into the castle Hyrule, in the middle of a storm no less, to rescue the imprisoned Princess Zelda, and trying to veer off course will be met with royal guards ordering you to turn away. You'll have to escape with Zelda via hidden passage to the sanctuary, where your real quest is made clear, obtaining the 3 pendants that will allow you access to the legendary Master Sword. And this is where the world is yours to explore however you see fit, and also whatever is within your means. There is a lot of interacting with the denizens of this world, no worries about door repair charges or 90% of the locals knowing nothing. You talk with people, you deal with people, sometimes you do them little favors and such, but for the most part, it's all about that world building stuff and finding out what you can to get around these haunted grounds and such. And just when you think it's all done, you've got the sword, you're ready to slay the wizard and such, bam! A whole new dark world awaits you, and then you've got more stuff to do. This is the closest A Link to the Past is going to get in terms of offering you a second quest, because when you eventually beat the game, well, that's it pretty much. But at the very least, your save doesn't reset when you beat the game, and you can continue playing to your heart's content. Presumably so you could catch up on some stuff you missed out on the first time if you're a completionist of sorts, so that's something to behold. Link's abilities are basic at first. He could pick up some pots and bushes until he comes across his first sword from his dead uncle. And while this sword doesn't shoot lasers, if you hold down the B button, you'll charge your sword and execute the whirlwind attack, a spinning move that hits all comers and hurts a little more. As you progress through the game, you'll gain other items that will grant you other abilities. Pegasus shoes, for example, lets you dash and bounce into things. Gloves lets you pick up boulders and heavier objects. A lamp lets you light up torches to provide illumination in dark rooms. Jars let you keep potions as well as anything you catch with a net, whether it be flies for attack or even fairies that can revive you when you're bitten to dust. And there's even some magical items that require the use of magical energy that you'll need to refill every so often, among other things. There's a bunch of stuff to do here, mini-games to play, heart container pieces to collect. Collecting 4 will add a heart to your life, and there's a whole bunch out there. That sort of thing. There's a bunch of stuff to find, secrets and stuff like that. That's all fine and dandy, but it's the little tweaks that make the game more playable compared to its NES ancestors, whether it be better sword attacks, better inventory management, better tools in general, or just the simple act of moving diagonally, giving Link a level of fluid control that he hadn't experienced up to that point. Control, for what it's worth, is sublime, and the core gameplay is superb. The various dungeons you'll have to conquer are firm but fair, and the bosses require a little more thought to be taken down compared to before. A Link to the Past was pushed as a prequel to the NES games for some reason. But I've always considered this to be more of a remake of those games, or rather a reimagining of sorts, as if to say this was the game they had in mind all along, but technology was the hurdle in fully realizing that intended vision. The game is pretty much its own self-contained adventure. You need not have played the prior games, or even the later games for that matter, to know what's going on. A Link to the Past will clue you in, which makes it a great introduction to the series as a whole. The only real drawback is that it's not quite as open-ended as in the original Zelda. Sure, in the overworld you could pretty much go wherever, save for a couple spots here and there, which may require a tool or two to reach, but dungeons are usually tackled in a sequence, since they usually require items to access them or even overcome some of the challenges within. That's about the game's only real gripe, and that speaks to the overall quality of A Link to the Past, when that's really the only real major issue, and you'll get over it eventually. Actually, I do have one other gripe with A Link to the Past. It's not a major one, but it's one that annoys me greatly, and that's Link's hair. It's too puffy, it's too bright reddish. I don't know if it's a design choice or they just couldn't animate straight brown hairish thing, but that puffy afro always rubbed me the wrong way. I don't know why, but I don't like it. Other than that though, A Link to the Past is a wonderful looking game. It's bright, colorful, clean looking, the animation's simple but smooth, the character designs, whether it be the humanoids, the grunts ranging from new takes on old baddies to all new creatures in general, and especially the bosses, all wonderful stuff and no hair issues whatsoever. The terrain's pretty good, and I do like the subtle attempts in making the light and dark worlds seem distinct despite being largely similar in the lay of the land, and the transition between worlds is also pretty smooth. There are rare instances of slowdown here and there that could hinder the game experience somewhat, but that's about it really. A fine looking game for an early SNES title. Complementing the splendid 16-bit graphical prowess is the wonderfully composed musical score. The main overworld theme gets a splendid reimagined remix with blaring instruments, and it's pretty much the only tune retained from the old games, but the rest of the game's soundtrack has its fair share of quality, great tunes, some of which would go on to be featured in subsequent titles down the road. Sound effects are what they are, but they sound like what they're supposed to. There's a couple grunt sounds that are rather charming to listen to, and no grating vocal bits added in, as was the case with the later Game Boy Advance port of A Link to the Past. Yeah, it's a nice way to have the game on the go at the time, but that gets grating after a while. So, whatever. So here's the deal. I'm not saying a whole lot here other than some very basic bits and bobs because let's be honest, A Link to the Past is not an obscure game by any means. It's been around a long time, it's gotten a lot of playtime by a lot of people, and it's one of the most highly regarded video games of all time. So if you already know the game, you've played it, whatever, there's not much I can say that you don't already know, and if you don't know the game, you haven't played it, you want to try it out, and you should, then the less you know going in, the more satisfying it'll be as you play it. There are not that many games that I'll say that about, but this is one of those games. The Legend of Zelda provided the foundation for this long-running series, and A Link to the Past builds the house, thus providing a template for the rest of the series to follow and build upon. It took what worked before in the previous generation, fleshed things out and expanded on those ideas further, added its own bells and whistles, and the end result is a splendid reimagining of the original Zelda gameplay that would serve as the template for other games to follow. It is without question one of the best games to grace the Super Nintendo, a console with more than its fair share of certified timeless classics, and even to this day, remains one of the pinnacles of this ever-evolving, ever-expanding Legend of Zelda that continues to thrive. As if you really need me to say anything further, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past is a game to add to that bucket list of video games you absolutely need to play, and there are more than plenty enough ways to do it these days, so go play it. And if you already played it, play it again. It's that damn good. And that's all I gotta say about that. Next video's on something else, by the way. We'll spread these Zelda things out every so often, and yeah, that's all I got. Bye.